Hello developers, how are you doing today? Welcome back to tapaScript and to the Next.js playlist once again. Today I'm very excited because I'm going to teach you how to use MongoDB as a data store with your Next.js application. And guess what? The project that we have been doing as part of this playlist, the LitLoop project, we are going to change and migrate its data to MongoDB. So far, all the data that we have used in that project is in-memory JSON object, but right now we are going to get those data in Mongo and then going to fetch those data from MongoDB and make that application working. Are you excited? Before we proceed further, I would like to take some moment to introduce you with the LitLoop project in case you are not aware of it. If you come to tapaScript YouTube channel, there is a playlist called Full Stack with Next.js App Router, and this is where you will find this video as well. In this playlist, there are 3 videos already created which explain how to create a full stack Next.js application ground up. We have started with design, then we have made that design reality with the Next.js application. We have understood layout and all the concepts around that. Then we used a context API provider along with Next.js App Router. So I would like to request you to first go through these 3 videos because that's going to set up your ground for building a full stack application using Next.js. Now into the part 4 of LitLoop, we are going to deal with MongoDB. We call it LitLoop, the application, just a name, just a fancy name, but at the end of it is an application for managing books and for you to sell, buy, rent books online. This is how the LitLoop project is currently. You got this user interface built with Next.js App Router, and we have in-memory JSON object somewhere in some file, and we have few accessor methods which can fetch the list of all the books or a book by its ID. And after this data is being fetched, we are consuming it into our pages components and we are displaying it in the manner that's how it is right now. Now it's time to change the things. So now that in-memory JSON object will be gone. Instead of that, we'll have MongoDB, and in front of MongoDB, we'll be using our ORM for MongoDB is called Mongoose. We'll be getting into a smaller explanation of what is MongoDB, what is Mongoose in a bit, but understand that there is a MongoDB and something in front of that is called Mongoose. And from Mongoose, we will have the accessor method, same like get all the books, get book by ID, etc. So that we don't disturb the existing UI much. We'll be just cutting down the data layer what we have in the LitLoop project today, and instead of that we'll be building a new data layer that is accessing a real database at the back end, which is MongoDB, and getting the same data, same kind of data structure, so that our UI components and the UI pages whatever we have built so far as part of this project development, it's not going to change. So I hope you enjoy doing this, and if so, please like and share this video and also subscribe because you don't want to miss the upcoming videos. We are going to do authentication on top of this, so that on the LitLoop project, 2 kind of persona are going to log in. One is administrator and the normal user. That's coming in the next video. You don't want to miss that. All right, so let's get started with a smaller explanation of what MongoDB is and what is Mongoose, why we are going to use it. Then we'll get into the code. Installing MongoDB is quite straightforward process. You can install it manually on your local box, or you can use the cloud instance of MongoDB called Mongo Atlas. However, there are certain restrictions with the free plan that is available with the MongoDB Atlas, but for a hobby project or a starter project, it should be enough for you. So either you create an account with MongoDB Atlas and get things set up how we'll be seeing it setting up locally right now, or install MongoDB locally on your box, which I prefer because you can experiment out for multiple projects, and then if it needs for you for one project to make public, then you go for Atlas. Exporting, importing data from one database to another database within MongoDB environment is quite easy and straightforward as well. I am going to install the MongoDB Community Edition, and my OS is Mac OS. Even if you are on Windows or any other operating system, the steps are very straightforward. To install MongoDB on Mac OS, just follow the command that are over here on this page. That's it. There are 2-3 commands. I just followed it, and then I could run MongoDB as a background process using brew service start MongoDB community at version. That's it. Then MongoDB will be running at the background process, and then you will be able to interact with the database. Now for interacting with the database, if there is a graphical user interface, it's always very easy. You can always go to the command prompt or terminal to interact with the database. But if there is a graphical user interface, I would say use that because it's going to make your work much easier. MongoDB Compass is exactly the tool that you need. It's a GUI for MongoDB. It's a free interactive tool. Just download it. And once you download, and if your MongoDB is running in the background, you can then launch Compass after installation and then give this particular thing MongoDB localhost by default port is 27017. It should be always populated for you. Then just click on connect to test out whether your MongoDB is running correctly or not. It's connected. And after connection, you can see that there will be a bunch of databases already configured for you, the default databases, for example, admin, config, local, etc. And on top of that, you can create your own database for any kind of work. That's where exactly I have created a database called LitLoop. And for creating a database, just click on this plus icon, give a database name and give a collection name. You can give your suitable database name and the collection name and click on create database. That's it. So for me, I have given LitLoop as the database name and the collection name as books. I had created another collection called users as well, and after creating the collection, for example books, you will be able to add data to it just by clicking on it. For adding data, there are two ways. If you already have a data backed up from something, you can just import it like a JSON file or CSV file, or you can insert a new document. A new document is like each of this row that you are able to see on my screen, right? The first one is a book information, then there is another book information. So once you do insert a document, you can insert those book information one by one. Okay, so for this particular video, what I have done, I have exported this data for you in the JSON format, and I am sharing this JSON format data with you. Repository details in the description of this video, so you can go to that repository, src db, then data-export. Inside that, you should see litloop.books.json, litloop.users.json. So you can import this file into your respective collections. For example, let me just do one for you. I'll create a new collection and give it a name called test. The new collection has been created. I'll click on add data and I'll do import JSON or CSV file. Now you're able to see this JSON file that I had exported, right? The same thing I have showed it to you as well. Let's pick up any of them. For example, let's pick up this books.json and then select stop on error, because in case there is an import error, you don't want to import the half-hearted things, and say import. Bingo. So now your test collection is having all the books data. You create a database called LitLoop, and then there are two collections that you have to create. One is called books, another called users. Go to books, import the books data the way that I have just now showed. Go to users, import the user data the same way that you will be importing the books data. So I don't need this test. I'm going to drop this collection. Right, that's it. My database is done. Now is the time that we're going to open VS Code to start coding things so that we can interact with this database and fetch this data into our application. One thing to notice, all the data previously was coming from this fake-data.js file. And if you recollect, there were two collections basically. One was user data, and it had this kind of fields, and there were two users. And there were books data. We had some 7-8 books with each of their attributes like title, description, cover image, and everything. So we have taken exactly this particular JSON as books data and put into the Mongo. That's what I asked you to import as well. I have kept it as a separate file. Same thing for the user data. So it means the data that we are using right now locally, we are going to disconnect that from our UI layer or from the query layer. Instead of that, we are going to establish the Mongo connection so that similar looking data structure we can start getting from MongoDB. Let's get started with that. First, let's create a .env file at the root of our project at the level of our src. And over here, we are going to define the URL that we'll be using to get an access to our MongoDB. You can give any name to this key value pair. I have given it as mongo_URI. You can give as data_URI or database_URL, whatever you would like to. And if you see the construct, it is like MongoDB : this is nothing but localhost, and this is the port to connect to MongoDB. Mongo is installed locally on this box. That's why it makes sense. And I have a database called LitLoop. We had created that, and that's what I'm saying that I am interested in connecting to. So I'm going to save this file. Up next, under src, I am going to create a new folder called services. Inside services, create a new file called mongo.js. In this mongo.js file, we are going to use this mongo underscore URI to establish a connection to MongoDB. All right. And this is where we want to introduce Mongoose to our application and we want to use it. Now to use Mongoose, you have to install it from npm repository. So open your terminal or the command prompt inside your project and then do npm install mongoose or yarn add mongoose. I'm using yarn, so I'll do yarn add mongoose and then I'll be installing this one. That's it. Mongoose is installed on my project, so I can go and verify on my package.json file. Great, I have mongoose installed. So now to continue with our mongo.js file, first import mongoose from mongoose and let us write a function called dbconnect. Okay, so this is the function we'll be using to connect to the database. Now Mongoose provide us few API. One of the API is called connect. It accepts the URL, the connection URL basically that we have given into our env file. So here we will be using stringifying of process.env dot this particular key. Now mongoose.connect is an async call. That's why we have to use the await keyword. And as we are using the await keyword, we have to make this function as async. And of course, this function will be using outside of this particular JS file. So we have to export it. Make sense? Now, after doing this, I can take this one in a variable called connection. And then finally, I can return the connection. Also, it is wise to put a try catch around so that in case of an error, I can at least see like it is reporting an error on my console. All right. So this is what my dbconnect function looks like. Great. Now the next thing would be I'll be using this dbconnect function into my Next.js territory so that the connection gets established and after that I will be able to make queries to my MongoDB. Now what is the best place to make this connection available? So I think whenever the application is coming up and a place which doesn't get re-rendered too many times so that this dbconnect doesn't get called too many times, that's the place would be best for this dbconnect to be called, right? So if I go to my application hierarchy under src inside app, there is a root level layout, correct? So I think this is the right place where I can import dbconnect and then inside the root layout over here I can call await dbconnect because the async function, and of course because of this I have to make this layout as an async function. So that's it. Okay, now if I'm interested to test it out whether the connection is established or not, what I can do const connection equals to this and then I can do console.log of con. Fair enough. Let us run this project from the terminal with yarndev. Over here on the browser, let's do localhost 3000. LitLoop app is up and running. Now the log that will be generating with console.log will be on the server side because layout is a server side component. So what I can see on my VS Code terminal is like it has printed the connection object, the one that I had printed. It is not an error. So it means my connection has been established and now I should be able to start performing operation to MongoDB. That's great. Now we have to create the schema and the model. Again, two new terms, schema and model. What does it mean? Now, if you see in the MongoDB, we had created a database, then we had created a collection. Inside the collection, this each of these row are nothing but the documents. And in each of this document, you have certain properties like title, description, author, etc. Now, you need something mapping in the Mongoose so that Mongoose can identify or map whenever you query something or create something or delete something or edit something on this database. Now, for this mapping purpose, you will be creating something called schema. The schema is a place where you will be telling that my document has a title which is of type string, my document has something called stock which is of type number and so on. If something is of type object, something is of type array, you have to all declare that. Along with that, at the schema level itself, you can provide certain kind of validator function if you want to. Now, once you define the schema, using the schema, you will be creating something called a model. Using the model, you will be able to query, create, update, delete records into your end database, the MongoDB database. So that's the difference between the schema and the model. Schema is basically the mapping factor of each of this attribute in your document. Model is a way, is a handle that provides to you by Mongoose through which you can query, create, update, delete all these operations on your MongoDB database. So let us go ahead again on VS Code and start creating our schema and the model. Inside SRC, let's create a new folder and call models. Inside model, let us create a new file called book-model.js. You can give any name of your choice. Now here, import Mongoose and also schema. These two things from Mongoose, you need them. Now first we'll be creating the schema. Const schema equals to new schema, and over here you have to provide that object along with the definition of each of those attributes in your document. For example, you have seen that I have a title, I have a description, I have an author. So how are you going to define that? You will be doing it like this. Title, and I define title as a required attribute. It means that it is mandatory. You must give a title of a book, and the title is of type string. Now these types are Mongoose type that is supported in MongoDB. So Mongoose support type like string, boolean, array, things like that is there in the documentation already. The documentation link is in the description of this video. Now like this, like how I have defined title, similarly you can next define something called description. Now description, if you want it to be mandatory, keep it requires true. If not, you can make it require false. It is of type string for sure. Like that, for every attributes that you see here, like author, cover, genre, pages is going to be number because it's a number. Is rented is going to be boolean. Okay. Now in some of the documents, you also have a rented IDs. If the book is rented by somebody, the rented ID is an array. So in this case, the type will be array. So maintaining this, let's finish the schema. I have just completed the schema. Title, description, then author is a string, cover string required, genre is a string required, pages is a number. You can see that it's required. Is rented is a boolean. Okay. Similarly, stock is a number, and then we have rented IDs, which is an array. Just now we discussed that. Now this is how I have defined the schema for myself. If required, I can also put certain validation, certain validator function within the schema itself. Okay. So for now, the schema is very lean and schema is very straightforward one. Using that, now I'm going to create a model and I'm going to export this as well. Export const book model. Again, any name of your choice you can give. I'll be using Mongoose dot. Here I'll be seeing inside the Mongoose models, if there is a model called books already existing, if that is existing, then return that. If it is not existing, only in that case, use a function called mongoose.model and then create a model called books using the schema we have just defined at the top. Okay, so this is important because otherwise it will attempt to create this model again and again whenever you access book model in your application, and while doing that it might throw some error. So to safeguard that, what I'm checking whether the mongoose.models.books inside mongoose models books is already there. If it is there, just return that. If it is not there, only in that case you create a books model from the schema. This book model I can start using in my application code inside app. Will be able to interact with MongoDB using Mongoose API. Now we will go to the DB folder that we have. We had introduced this DB folder in the beginning because that is where we have this data-export, and we kept our JSON files for you to import in your database. In the same DB folder, go ahead and create a new folder, and inside queries, create a new file index.js. Now here we are going to write a few queries. One query is to get all the books from the database, and another query is to get a book by its ID. Now, if you remember again the fake data.js file, over here we had these two users and books, and below that we had two utility functions, get all books and get book by ID. This get all books is being used already inside the pages on the /store route. That's how I'm getting all the books and passing it to this component. Now my intention is to not to change anything in this file apart from this particular import. Instead of taking get all books from this fake data, now this get all books should come from this queries index.js. This get all books is now getting the thing from a local fake data JSON file, and we are going to change that to get the data from MongoDB, so that we will be keeping all this structure, all the syntaxes as it is without disturbing any of the UI code. That's why we made a deal in the beginning of this video. Now to continue, I'll keep the same name, get all books, go to queries index.js file. And here I'll be creating a function called get all books, and inside this now I am going to use the book model. So for that, let's import book model, and here I'll be doing book model. Mongoose gives us a find method called find. Now if you want to retrieve everything, all the details, basically it's like select star from a table in the RDBMS, you call the find method. And on top of that, I am going to call a method called lean. There is a reason for that. Because when you call this find method, apart from the data, there will be a lot of metadata also coming to you from this particular model, from the database. You don't really need those metadata. If you don't need those metadata and you want to cut down on the data exchange, you are only interested on the data in the document, like those title, description, and etc. In that case, you use it lean. But if you want to take the metadata also, in that case, please use it without any lean. Let me show you the difference very quickly. Now this has to be a await, and this is going to return me all books, and I'm going to return this all books from here. Simple. And then below I'm going to export get all books. We have to do one more thing, as this is an await, because it's an async function. The find is an async function. We have used await keyword. We have to make this function as async as well. Don't forget that. Now we are going to go to the app store page.js file, where this get all books from the fake data we have used. Now instead of this, I am going to import get all books from this db/queries, not from the fake data. So let's do this. Now this get all books should be having an await keyword because it is an async function. We just now had made this. Now, as it is having await, we have to make this as a async function as well. All right. So this is good. Now let us do one thing. Let us do a console.log of books. Now, if I see this, do you see what is happening over here? The console.log, it has lot of internal details. For example, this internal cache, a bunch of details that you are not really, you don't care. And then somewhere underneath you have the actual value. This is the actual value. Title, description, everything. Now I don't want these values at all. I don't want this dollar underscore, is new and all this stuff at all. So that's the reason in my queries I'll be using .lean. And now if I save and if I come back to my page, now you see this is really lean down. You have ID, title, description, and everything. You don't have this metadata at all. You get my point? Okay. Now, the thing is, if I go a little bit deep down into the book list component, I see something called book.id, isn't it? And even in a later point in time also, with the book.id itself, I have created other routes and all. You know that. You are following this since a few videos. This ID is not present in the document that I have received. Why? Because if I mouse over on this console.log, I see something called underscore ID. Now what I can do is, like, everywhere in my code, wherever I have done book.id, I can change to book._id. Second thing is, like, underscore ID is returning me something called an object. It's another object ID. Inside that buffer is there. Inside that particular ID is there. So after taking this, I have to also call a .toString method on top of it so that I can get the actual ID. So I can do that as a process. Or what I can do is, like, after getting this books data, I can actually modify it in a way that I remove this underscore ID because I don't need this underscore ID, or I still keep this underscore ID. But instead of that, I create a new property inside these books called ID, so that my rest of the code is never ever getting modified, and this new property will have exactly the same value that underscore ID is having, the actual ID, right? So that we are not losing on the actual ID, but instead of underscore ID, we are continue to use ID in our data structure. Now to do that computation, instead of doing it here, because tomorrow it might be required in some other places as well. So that's where inside SSC, now I'm going to create a new folder called utils, and inside util, let's create a new file called data-util.js. Here I'm going to create a very simple JavaScript function which doesn't require much of explanation, but I'll try to explain to you what it is doing. It is basically replacing underscore ID with ID. Okay, there might be a better way of doing this, but this is what I found really short and sweet. So what I'm doing here, I have a method which called replace Mongo ID in array. It takes an array like our books array, and I'm mapping all this particular array. That means I'm taking each of this book out. From there, whatever the underscore ID.toString value, I'm assigning to ID and new property, and then rest whatever is there, because the complete book is also getting returned. So right now, at this point in time, the books array will have another additional attribute called ID with underscore ID's value. After that, underscore ID is not required is what I feel. So I just remove the underscore ID from here and taken the rest of it. So it means that at this point in time, it will have all the properties except underscore ID, but a new property called ID with underscore ID's value. So if I take this guy and go to my queries, I import this, and then just before returning this, I'll just pass it through this particular method. So what will happen right now? All these books that you have retrieved, it has underscore ID. Now on this return statement, the underscore ID is just replaced with an ID with the same value of underscore ID. Now if I come to page.js and try to inspect it, you can see straight away there is no more underscore ID. You have ID, title and everything. Now rest of the things should fall in place. Now if I go to UI once, refresh the stuff, go to my store, I am seeing an error, and showing this error is quite intentional because this is how you have to handle the external files or the image files in your Next.js application. What it is saying that res.cloudinary.com is not configured for images in your project. Go to this particular documentation. If I go to this documentation, it says that you have to add this into your configuration because you have to let your Next.js application know from where you are picking up the assets. If it is not from locally, where from remote you are picking up the assets. If I go to my MongoDB for a moment, you see the cover images are coming from Cloudinary, isn't it? This is an external resource from where I am getting the images. So I have to declare that in Next.js project, and that's the reason I'll go to next.config.js file. Coming here, I'm going to paste that code that I've copied from the documentation. I don't need this part and path name. And over here, instead of this default host name, I'll be giving res.cloudinary.com because that's what this error is for. Okay. Now, as I've added that, I'll save this file and I have to restart my local server once. So I'll do Control C and then do a restart. Great. Now I'll be on my UI and I'm just going to refresh this. Awesome. Now all this data coming from the MongoDB, it is no more coming from my local store. Even if I delete this local store file after a while, it will still serve the data from Mongo store because I have disconnected for the book list page from the local store. I'm getting it from the Mongo store through Mongoose. Now if I mouse over on this, okay, in the bottom you should be able to see the ID that it is locating to. That is great. But if I click on it, what happened? It's probably going to fail. Yes. Why? Because this code of going to individual book details, I have not changed yet. I have just changed the thing on the book list page. Now the ID that it is going to go for, like this particular ID which is from MongoDB, this ID is not available in the fake JSON file from where it has to pick up the details and show, right? Because this code is still looking into the fake JSON file. That's why it is failing. Now let's go to that specific file, which is store ID, this page.js file. And we are going to now replace this get books by ID, which is coming from fake data, to a new function that will be creating under our queries through Mongoose can access a book by its ID from MongoDB. So copy this guy, the name, so that we can reuse the same name. Go to our queries index.js file and over here create a async function which takes an ID, and here const book equals to await. Again use the same book model dot find by ID. Now I have used another API from Mongoose called find by ID. If I pass the ID, it is going to query my DB, and after querying my DB, it is going to give me this book. Now from here, I am going to return this book the same way that I did it for the last time for all the books. Great. Now I'm going to export this as well. So comma export, save it. Now going to this page, this store.id, I am going to remove this fake data one and import get book by ID from queries instead of fake data from queries. Now the same get book by ID will be called here, but it's an async call, so it will have await, and of course this will be an async function now. This is great. Now I'm going to do console.log of this book. Great. Let's see what console.log gives. It again giving me those metadata, right? This dollar active path, and you know how to fix it now. So you will go very smartly over here and you do lean. So once you do lean and save it, you come back to your page.js, you see this has gone, all the metadata has gone, but still you have another problem persist, which is like you are getting underscore id. So that means you have to write again another utility function, which will look into this object and then transfer this underscore id or translate this underscore id to a new property whose name is just id, because our application is dealing with just id as a property, so underscore id will be unnecessary. So for that, similarly, in our data util, where we have written this replace mongo id in array, let us write one more function called replace mongo id in object. A simple object destructuring methodology. Now, if you want to know really deep down object destructuring methodology, I have a video on it. Again, that video link is there in the description of this video. If you really want to know more about it, you can actually look into it to identify a lot of use cases around this. So, but let me explain this, what I'm doing. So I'm taking the object as an input. Let's consider this is one of the books object. In that, I'm destructuring it, creating a new property called id, whose value is objects underscore id, and call toString on it so that I get the id. After getting that, whatever the updated object I am getting, from that updated object, I am just removing underscore id, and I am getting back one object which has a new property id with underscore id's value, but underscore id is removed from here. Okay. Now I'll be using this also multiple places. That's why I'm keeping in the util. Now let's go back to our query. Along with array, import the replace mongo id in object as well. Copy this guy, and then the book that we were getting, just pass it through this particular utility function, so that now we'll be getting the book without underscore id, but with the new id attribute. I saved it. I'll go to here, and if I see book now, I don't have underscore id. First of all, I have title, description, all this thing, cover, genre, everything is intact, and I also have an id. So now whatever the book list data structure is having for each of the book, the id, it will match with individual books id as well. So if I go to UI now, you see that it's already started appearing. So I go to books again, I go to any of the other book. Great, it is coming. Let's quickly check all other functionality. For example, I click on buy of this book got added, rent of this book, and then rent of this book. So 3 books. If I go to my cart, it is showing 3, and in the cart all these 3 got added. This is the total amount. If I want to remove one, I can remove one, and if I want to give some kind of fake checking out thing, make payment, done. So everything is now connected to database. To prove that, let's open Campus, and over here let's change this particular title, The Great Gatsby 101, and then update. Now let's go to our UI, let's go to books, The Great Gatsby 101. So it's taking from the DB, evident. All right, so I hope you found this quite exciting. Did you find it useful? Did you learn how to connect to MongoDB using Mongoose from your Next.js application? Was it easy for you? I guess it was quite straightforward. And this is just the foundational part, because after this we are going to do more things. The few more things are going to happen on the same LitLoop application. One is the authentication that we are going to do next, and for that we'll be dealing with that user collection. You remember we have created one user but we have not used, and after that we will be doing the feature of adding a book into the database and then getting that book information and showing the new book information. So right now we have only done the fetch, but lot more things are coming, the update, delete, creation, authentication. So stay tuned, and again don't forget to subscribe, because you don't want to miss out the great content that I'm putting a lot of effort for you, so that you can learn things really well. So please subscribe and be well, stay well, keep learning. Thank you very much.